Welcome back to Beyond Wisdom, where we explore timeless truths for a more peaceful and meaningful life. Today, we're exploring a quiet truth that ancient civilizations understood deeply. The idea that the self isn't something you are, it's something you become. In our modern world, we often talk about finding ourselves, as if who we are is a fixed treasure buried somewhere inside. But in many ancient traditions, the self was not discovered. It was formed, shaped, and cultivated like a garden. This shift in perspective changes how we live, how we grow, and how we understand our place in the world. To the ancient Greeks, especially in the teachings of Socrates and later the Stoics, the self was not a finished product. Socrates famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," not because he believed we should obsess over ourselves, but because he saw life as a process of shaping our soul through reflection, discipline, and virtue. You weren't simply born with a self, you earned it. Character wasn't a given. It was forged through choices, hardships, and daily habits. In this view, life is like a sculptor working on stone. The raw material is given, yes, your body, your temperament, your early upbringing. But what matters is how you chisel at it, what you carve out. The Greek word ethos, where we get ethics, literally meant habit. It suggested that your moral character was something built over time by what you practiced. That means the self is not a thing you find. It's something you craft, moment by moment. In contrast to the Western idea of the individual as a separate unit, many Eastern philosophies saw the self as something more relational and fluid, something that arises in connection, not isolation. In Confucianism, for example, the self was not defined in a vacuum. You were not just a person, but a son, a sister, a friend, a citizen. These roles weren't limitations. They were the raw material for moral cultivation. The self was shaped through how well you fulfilled your relationships with respect, care, and humility. Confucius didn't ask people to be themselves. He urged them to become worthy of themselves, to develop integrity through daily rituals, family duties, and self-restraint. It was a path of refinement. Similarly, in Buddhism, the idea of anatta, or no fixed self, pointed toward a liberating truth, that we aren't bound by a solid, unchanging identity. Who we are is in constant motion, and that's not a flaw, it's an opportunity. If the self is impermanent, then we are free to grow. Ancient wisdom rarely celebrated arrival points, the idea that you reach some final version of yourself and then rest. Instead, life was seen as a pilgrimage. In indigenous cultures across the Americas, this was reflected in the idea of the good road, a way of living that emphasized respect, harmony, and learning through experience. You walked the path. You learned from the land, the seasons, the elders, and in doing so, you became someone of value. It wasn't about who you were at birth, but who you chose to become through how you walked. The Lakota concept of wachekiye, which roughly translates to prayer, was not just about speaking to the divine. It was a way of orienting yourself, of aligning your heart and your actions with something higher. Again, the self here is not passive. It is formed through devotion, humility, and ongoing effort. In many ancient and tribal cultures, identity wasn't simply declared, it was earned. You moved from child to adult through initiation, through ritual, through facing difficulty. These moments were meant to dissolve the old self so something new could emerge. It wasn't enough to want to be wiser, braver, or more mature. You had to pass through something that changed you. In African traditions, the Dagara people of Burkina Faso held that every person is born with a gift, but the self must be cultivated in order to carry it. Without elders, without trials, without community support, the gift remains dormant. That's why initiation was central. It activated the self. It reminded the young that identity isn't a label, it's a responsibility. Today we often hear phrases like, "Be true to yourself," or "Just be yourself," as if our most authentic self is hidden somewhere inside, waiting to be expressed. But ancient traditions would caution us. The self is not something we express until it is first something we shape. Authenticity, without discipline or wisdom, is just impulse. To the Stoics, for example, being true to yourself meant being true to your higher nature, your rational, moral, resilient self. And that takes effort. The philosopher Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In other words, become worthy of who you imagine yourself to be. Don't just look inward, look forward. The goal isn't to find yourself. It's to become someone admirable. In our image-driven world, the self is often tied to what others see, how we appear, how we are perceived, how we brand ourselves. But for ancient peoples, the self was more like a legacy, something you leave behind in how you lived. The Egyptians believed the soul was weighed against a feather at death, not to judge how authentic you were, but how much integrity and truth you carried. If your soul was heavy with lies, cruelty, or selfishness, it could not pass on. But if it was light, you had lived well. In the Taoist tradition, the wise person was often invisible, not in the literal sense, but in the sense that they didn't seek attention or praise. Their self was not a performance, but a quiet alignment with nature, with virtue, and with balance. They became themselves, not by standing out, but by standing with the way. Perhaps the most powerful truth across all these traditions is simple. You become what you do repeatedly. The self is not a thought or a feeling. It's a pattern, a rhythm, a lived process, and every choice is part of that formation. The ancient Indian concept of dharma captured this well. It was your path, your duty, your way of being in the world. Not imposed, not rigid, but responsive. If you walked your dharma with care, courage, and humility, yourself would blossom through your actions. That's why rituals mattered. Why daily disciplines mattered. Why how you treated others mattered. Because every interaction was part of shaping you. The self wasn't in your head. It was in your habits, your tone of voice, your patience, your generosity. Becoming yourself wasn't about self-discovery. It was about self-alignment. Ancient wisdom didn't see the self as a prize to be won or a label to be embraced. It saw the self as a lifelong responsibility. Something sacred, something earned through living well. We are not finished, and maybe we never will be, but that's not a failure. It's the beauty of it. Each day, we are invited to become a little more honest, a little more kind, a little more awake. And through these quiet choices, a deeper self begins to take form. Not the self we started with, but the one we've slowly, patiently become. What's one quality you want to become more of? Not just know, but truly embody. Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. If this video brought you value, subscribe to Beyond Wisdom. Until next time, stay calm, stay strong, and stay wise.